Last week, we saw Jacob stab his brother Esau in the back and take advantage of his father's blindness in order to steal his inheritance and God's blessing from under his nose. Now, he was successful in that deceitful scheming, but now he's going to quite rapidly learn that if you treat people like that, it can have severe consequences. For a start, to see the physical pain on his father's face that he'd caused his dad, to know that he'd trembled violently when he realised what his son had done to him, and to see that continued look of disappointment on his face must have filled him with agony, must have made him writhe with agony inside. If only he could take back the hurt that he caused his dad, but he couldn't. It's too late. Thankfully, though, his dad, Isaac, was very forgiving. He'd come to realise through this whole episode that even though Jacob had gone about getting this blessing in a wrong and wicked way, that it was actually God's intention to give Jacob the blessing. When Jacob and his brother Esau were born, God had chosen Jacob to bring Jesus, the offspring, into the world and to share his blessing of love and forgiveness for sin far and wide. And that's why we see Isaac blessing Jacob again there in verse 3 of chapter 28. The problem for Jacob, though, is that doesn't mean that everything's all like kissed and made up and better now. His brother wants to take hold of that knife that Jacob used to stab him in the back, and he wants to wipe him off the face of the earth. He's stuffed up so badly that he just can't stay at home now. He has to go, and he has to go rapidly. Forget that time that we saw months ago of when Abraham's servant left the family home in order to find Isaac a wife. That was a time of joyful anticipation when Abraham's servant left at that time. He left with 10 camels, and they were all loaded up with loads of gifts. But Jacob's leaving with no camels, no gifts, no company. This is no big adventure for Jacob. He's leaving his family under a cloud of disgrace. And in a lot of ways, this night was a night that signified the end of Jacob's life. Everything before that was covered in a greasy layer of deceit. No doubt he shuddered and felt sick as he looked back upon all of that sin and shame of it all. But then as he looked ahead as well, as he looked to the future, that was equally dark and uncertain for him. If he'd known that if it was going to end up like this after all of his deceitful scheming, then he'd probably never have done it. This just wasn't him. This wasn't. He wasn't a man of the open country like his brother Esau. He liked his home comforts. He didn't want to be 50 miles from home in the middle of nowhere. He didn't want to hunt and fend for himself. He didn't want to sleep under the stars with a rock under his head, exposed to the elements and all the threats of the wild around him. He wanted to be at home with his mum. But instead he's alone, he's scared, he's vulnerable, and he's incredibly apprehensive about the future. This was no doubt a night of utter hopelessness for Jacob. And the worst thing about it all, out there, all alone, is that he knew that he'd brought all of this upon himself. He doesn't deserve anything less than to be out on his ear. He deserved to be sent away. He deserved the disappointment of his father. He deserved the hatred of his brother. He deserved never to see his beloved mother again. He certainly didn't deserve anything from God after dragging his name through the mud in the process of snatching this blessing. This night would have been the lowest point in Jacob's life. He put his head down, anticipating this nightmare to continue. But little did he know that this very night, this darkest hour of his life, is a night where his life is going to be turned upside down and inside out. This night full of regrets is going to turn into a night that Jacob will never want to forget. Because this very night is the night that he is going to meet with Jesus. As he slept, it says in verse 12 that he saw this stairway with angels all over it going up and coming down from heaven. Now, humanly speaking, Jacob was all alone that night. He trashed his life. He was without a friend and he was without hope. And then heaven and the way to heaven was opened up before him. Jesus later on explains in John chapter 1 that he is this stairway that Jacob's looking at, that Jacob is encountering in Genesis 28. He's the one who connects the earth with heaven. The stairway that opens up heaven to us. Jesus is heaven's invitation to Jacob and to us to come on in. And in this chapter, heaven and heaven's blessing is going to be opened up to Jacob. From the top of this staircase, the Lord stands and he reassures from there this blessing, his blessing upon Jacob. He's going to provide him with many descendants who will bring the descendant, Jesus, and the blessing of Jesus into the world. And he'll provide them with a land which will be like a little piece of heaven on earth, because he himself will be present with them there. And then he says something in these verses, in verse 15, that is incredibly comforting to Jacob. He says, I am with you, and I will watch over you wherever you go, and I will bring you back to this land. I will not leave you until I have done what I promised you. How did Jacob respond to this? How did Jacob respond when heaven and the way to heaven and heaven's blessing was revealed to him in this way? Well, he's happy to receive that. He's happy to receive it. In fact, he looks like he totally freaks out. He was afraid and says, "Surely the Lord is in this place and I was not aware of it. How awesome is this place?" Now, this wasn't a kind of like hiding behind the sofa or trembling in the corner kind of fear. It's a healthy fear of God that Jacob is showing here. He's overwhelmed by the all-consuming love and forgiveness of God. He knows that he is a sinner. He feels that kind of grace and disgustingness of his life. He's a stuff-up on earth. So he knows that he doesn't deserve like the attentions of heaven. He's totally humbled at this sight. He's blown away and he's thankful for the love that God is showing him. And he responds by loving him back. Heaven and Jesus, the way to heaven, is opened up to us in these verses. No matter what regrets you have, no matter how dark and hopeless your life might be at the moment, Jesus is heaven's invitation to you to come on in. You know, you might have a lot of baggage, like Jacob. You may know that you don't deserve the attention of heaven either. You know, none of us do. But Jesus wants to meet with you, and he wants to pour out his blessing upon you right where you are. Many years after this book, Genesis, was written, Jesus fulfilled all the promises that he made within this book to deal with humanity's sin and separation from God because of our sin. He came and he bled and died so that you could be forgiven and so that you could be with him forever in heaven. What's your response to that today? Will you accept the hope, the forgiveness, and the new life that Jesus is offering to you this very day? Well, at the start of this night, Jacob had been so ashamed of his life. He'd been utterly hopeless, without purpose or direction. But early the next morning, after Jacob had received God's blessing and forgiveness, he's so full of hope and he's so full of excitement about the new life that God had in store for him. He says there in verse 20, Then Jacob made a vow, saying, "If God will be with me and watch over me on the journey that I'm taking, and will give me food to eat and clothes to wear, so that I return safely to my father's household, then the Lord will be my God. And this stone I have set up as a pillar will be God's house. And of all that you give me, I will give you a tenth." He'd heard God's words to him in verse 15, and he's taken them to heart here. God had said, "I am with you. I will watch over you wherever you go. I will bring you back home. I will not leave you." With these words, he's giving him comfort, he's giving him direction, he's giving him a future, and he's giving friendship to Jacob. And Jacob's life is turned upside down because of them. He knows now that he will never be outside of God's caring gaze. He knows now that he's never going to be out of God's loving embrace. He's entered into a personal relationship with the God of heaven. And now life is never going to be the same again. No longer is this just the Lord of his father Abraham and of Isaac. The Lord will be my God as well, Jacob says. And his actions show the allegiance of his heart as the verses go on. He can see that the Lord is the maker of heaven and earth now, the giver of all good things that we enjoy. And so it's his pleasure and it's his privilege to give him back from his own wealth so that God's work on earth will be blessed. And he also sets up this pillar to remind him that this is the place where heaven and the way to heaven was opened up before him. This night was a night that he never, ever wants to forget now. And he's going to come back to this place to worship this great God of love and forgiveness who saved him and changed his life for all eternity. And if you belong to Jesus this morning, he speaks the same words over you as was spoken over Jacob. He says, I will never leave you. I will never forsake you. You can rest assured that you will never be out of the loving gaze of Jesus. You'll never be out of his loving, saving embrace. Life may well not always be easy, as it isn't at the moment, and our future may be uncertain. But with Jesus, you will be comforted. You will have direction. You do have a future. And you most certainly have a friend. Well, let's sing. Let's sing now. Let's worship him now with a song that you may well not know, but enjoy these words. They are awesome and wonderful words. Let's give thanks to the great God of heaven, who has poured his love out to us in Jesus, who so wants to forgive our sins and bring us into a new life with him that will last for all eternity. Let's sing now.